So I got a question about the assignment that's due today. So the question was, can you explain the assignment due tonight in a little more detail? Does everybody have to submit it? Do we have to meet with our group mates to complete an assignment? So today, so I guess the answer to that. So not everybody needs to submit it. There should be one submitted per group. And basically it identifies the different people's contribution and how they're going to contribute. So in the case, again, whether that means that the person is going to work by themselves or with a group, and again, identify what everyone is working on that. So hopefully that answers that question sufficiently. Anything else about that? Okay, well, I'll keep my chat window open. So today we are going to cover, continue talking about surfactants a bit. We are going to move into talking about emulsions, which are a type of colloid that can benefit from surfactants. Yeah, let's start there. We'll be moving into coatings into next week. But one other announcement is I was notified that we are not allowed to have a quiz on the last day of class like we have scheduled right now. Oh, okay. So one other question. If we want to work individually, do we need to join a group? Yeah, the instructions are to join a group unless you have permission from me otherwise. So you should be identifying within your interest area, what do you want to work on that's different from everybody else. Okay, so Katie, that was addressing your question. Okay, so we can't have a quiz on the last day of class like we have scheduled. So what I will be doing instead is assigning an extra credit assignment. So if people think that they maybe could do better, I will have an optional assignment that can allow you to demonstrate what you know in maybe a longer term fashion. So it'll be something you can work on individually. You can ask me questions, but I will post that and give you some time to be able to do it. So that is the plan now. And in some ways, it's probably better because I anticipate the end of this compressed semester to be a lot of work, and it's probably better to not have a quiz at the end of that anyhow. So I was not anticipating that to be a challenging quiz at all, but let's just not have a quiz like the rules say, and that will be the adjustment that we're making. So that will be reflected in Canvas in a bit, but I just learned about that this week. Quiz 4 will be next week. It'll be on the material that we've covered between Monday and Wednesday, which will cover Brownian motion, surfactants, light scattering, basics, let's see, zeta potential. We'll be moving into some effects of surfactants, we'll see how far we get to this, and we may start to cover coatings a little bit. So you can look forward to that. So it'll be a bit of a mismatch. Yeah, of subjects, but mostly related to, again, the end of what we're covering in chapter 14 and extending out away from the book a little bit, and then moving into this idea of surfactants and things related to that as we move forward. Okay, so thanks for the questions. Let's move forward a bit. So we started talking about surfactants in the last class. We talked about, well, I am sharing my screen, right? Yes. Okay. So there are some interesting effects of surfactants. So for example, you've all maybe have the experience of seeing a soap bubble, right? So this is a case where you have a surfactant, in this case soap, and that is, you're able to make a bubble out of soapy water, but you cannot create a bubble out of just water itself. So that will be basically the goal of what we're trying to achieve over the next couple of classes, to understand those effects and how that type of effect can be taken advantage of for a variety of purposes. Okay. But maybe before that, what we want to do is classify these surfactants a little bit more. There are different types of surfactants, and we started a little bit in terms of understanding broadly the structure of surfactants. So this is tied a little bit to some stuff we've been talking about with charges and surface charges, because oftentimes surfactants have a charge. Okay. So we did a little bit of structural classification of surfactants, like we talked about the idea that they can be like dimeric or polymeric, or they can be made out of block copolymers. But let's talk about more, instead of their structure, their chemistry. Okay, so let me make sure my chat window is open so I can see anything. Ball of sand. There we go. Okay. Okay, so one of the most common ones that you will see is our anionic surfactants. So these have a hydrophilic head group with a negative charge. So examples of this are, so for example, carboxylates. So these carboxylate type things that are, for example, what you would find in soap. So fatty acids are example of this type of surfactant. So that's made through taking some type of typically fat or some kind of organic chain with a carboxyl group at the end, and reacting it with traditionally sodium hydroxide. And that makes this type of surfactant. So other things that are common are sulfates or sulfonates. So for example, if you take your bottle of shampoo, usually you'll see something like sodium dodecyl sulfate or sodium lauryl sulfate. So that's the stuff, that's the primary surfactant in there, and it's the mechanism for how it's able to clean your hair, and also to some extent lather and stuff like that. So that's why people, it's really cheap, and it's really effective, actually maybe too effective. That's why we see a lot of shampoos nowadays that are labeled SDS or SLS free, because it actually is so effective that it strips off all of the natural oils on your skin, and it causes people a lot of like dermatological problems. Anyhow, it's a really powerful surfactant, and it's used widely for consumer products and in industry. Actually, all of these are to some extent. So let's say that's one. So there are also cationic surfactants. So again, this would be the hydrophilic head has a positive charge. So an example of this would be a quaternary ammonium salt. So something like R4. So R again here would be some kind of organic chain typically, but it could be other things. N plus X minus. So these are things that you would see as something ammonium sulfate, for example, right? So you see these a lot again in consumer products. And the combinations of anionic and cationic surfactants are oftentimes used to impart different properties. And also they can be, the combination of these can cause like big structures to form, and it can affect things like viscosity, for example, of your solution in a way that would be difficult to. So for example, again, for consumer products like shampoo is a great example. You can add these combinations of surfactants and they can form what are called supramolecular structures, where these can link together and alter the viscosity of your solution. So that is another advantage. Again, when we're thinking about the consumer experience, the shampoo may be just as effective if it had a lower viscosity, but it'll be more difficult to use in terms of dispensing an appropriate amount. So again, things to think about: connecting the chemistry and principles here to what you want to do in terms of engineering design. So we have anionic, cationic, and another one we can talk about is non-ionic. So this has no charges, but has a hydrophilic function that comes from polarity. So oftentimes these are some kind of polymer type thing. So like polyoxyethylene is one example. So there's two more that we're going to classify. So anionic, cationic, non-ionic. So the next one is going to be amphoteric. So again, to brush up on our Latin, amphi refers to both. Or in a way. So there's going to be two things that have some element of having both. So amphoteric means that the molecule has either, it's not both, positive or negative charge depending on pH. So these are things like, the example here is something called a sulfobetaine. So this beta comes from the fact it comes from beets. So these class of molecules are often called betaines because they're derived from beets. And you will see these a lot in consumer products too. So depending on the pH, that amine group could have a positive charge, or that SO3 group could have a negative charge, but typically not both. So if you move towards a acidic environment, you'll protonate the sulfonate group. If you move towards a basic environment, you will, yeah, so basically, yeah, you'll have this pH dependence here. Wait. No, that's not right. Sorry, everybody, this is wrong. This is a zwitterionic surfactant. This does not switch. Sorry, everybody. This is the next class of surfactants. This is a mistake. Okay, so I don't have an example for this one right now. So the last class is zwitterionic. So that does not deprotonate. So in amphoteric, oftentimes this can be many peptides or proteins do this. Tend to be amphoteric. Those are natural type surfactants. So I believe we have a lot of those in our body. So for example, we have pulmonary surfactants that help us be able to breathe. That's oftentimes a problem with premature babies. So if any of you know anyone who's born premature, I was actually born 3 months premature myself. So I know that from what they told me, I had some difficulties breathing. And one of the big problems that they face is that while most of the organs are developed for babies that young, they are not developed. They don't yet have the ability to produce naturally occurring pulmonary surfactant. And the treatment for that is an artificial amphoteric surfactant that they can administer through an aerosol. So that has dramatically improved the rate of survival for premature infants. Okay, so anyways, last one is zwitterionic. So this one has, so amphoteric has either plus or minus charge dependent on pH, and zwitterionic has both at the same time. And the beta-enes are zwitterionic, not amphoteric. And this is sulfobeta-enes. So we have a bunch of surfactants, and again, they all have similar function in the sense of how they affect the properties of water, how they affect, we talked about yesterday, their detergency, for example. So the question is, why would we choose one over the other? Why would you choose different surfactants? Why would you choose one or the other? So we can think about the application it's oriented towards, oftentimes as engineers. So we could think about one case. Again, I mentioned shampoo. And this is a convenient one because most people may have some kind of shampoo or something like that at home. And you can read the bottle and you can see a lot of these in there. In fact, you will see oftentimes all three of them in there. Some usually not, less commonly the non-ionic surfactant, but even that can be in there. So again, the functions they can have are cleansing, which specifically would be detergency, foaming. So it turns out that people like the visual indication that shampoo is doing something. So it turns out that foaming makes cleaners less effective at things less effective at actually cleaning, but it gives people the impression that it works. So people formulate shampoo with foaming agents. So for dishwashers or laundry detergent, they actually incorporate anti-foaming agents to make it more effective. So again, keep that in mind, that oftentimes what's important is the consumer experience. I mentioned viscosity enhancement, and also this idea of conditioning. So certain surfactants can actually bind to your hair, for example. In some cases, they're oils, they can be surfactants. In some cases, they're actually polymers that are added that are designed to bind to your hair to solve some kind of problem that you may perceive with your hair, like it sticking up or something like that, or having too much volume or not enough volume. So other things are like other parts of it, like the smell of it. Some of these don't smell good, so you may avoid using those even if they would be otherwise effective. So again, thinking about everything. So the other thing is, like I said, in shampoo, you will see combination of anionic and cationic surfactants. And they have different functions. So the most common anionic surfactant we'll see is some kind of alkyl sulfate. Something like SLS, which is sodium lauryl sulfate, or dodecyl sulfate. In the case of anionic, we'll see alkyl amides or amides, alkanol amides. So things like this would be things like, you'll see ethanolamine in here, which is actually a somewhat nasty chemical by itself, but it's oftentimes used in shampoo at low concentrations. Other things you'll see are things like labeled as cocoa amide. It's an amide that's made from coconut oil derived chains, so that cocoa refers to the whole spectrum of chain lengths that you would get from starting with coconut oil. So again, it's a coconut oil derivative, but these have different functions. So these guys will provide cleaning or detergency and foaming quality. And the function of these are what like industrial people call a slip enhancer, which is more of like a conditioning effect. This idea that you can like easily run your hands through your hair or something like that. Okay, so it changes the texture, and that's because your hair is actually charged itself. So, the times if your hair is sticking up, it's because it has like a static charge on it. And there are ingredients in shampoos and conditioners that can affect that. And also actually the pH of your hair affects that a lot. So just like we talked about surface charge before and its pH dependence, your hair has that effect. And you can reduce the surface charge by reducing the pH typically. So you should try that if you're ever having hair problems. You can throw some vinegar on it or something. It actually does work, although maybe it's unpleasant. Okay, Anionic. Oh, thank you. Someone caught this. That the second one should be cationic. Thank you for catching that, Hannah. Okay, thanks. Okay, some other things about surfactants we want to talk about. So we learned about how surfactants affect surface tension before, but let's talk about some more complicated effects. So we're going to be talking more about dynamic effects of surfactants. So this idea of surface tension is not a dynamic effect; it's a sort of static effect, right? You change the surface tension, but how does it affect our interaction with? How does surfactants affect our interaction with materials? And I think maybe you'll get an idea about this. Okay, so if we have, let's draw a surface of water. So we have some surface, and suppose this is some clean surface that we are trying to deform with some force. Now let's compare this to some surface that has surfactants on it. So in this case, the intuitive thing is that you'll push down on it and it will resist deformation because it has surface tension. So you'll see, like, if you put your finger or some small probe, let's say, on the surface, you'll see that it will deform the surface until you apply enough force to break through. So it will resist deformation. In the other case, it will still resist deformation, but it will have lower resistance due to the lower surface tension. So lower resistance meaning that we would need to use less force to deform it, and also it will break with a lower amount of force. So let's think about applying force the other way, or shear. So we have this surface of water, and say we have some point that we are probing here. Let's use this. And we want to apply some force that way. So if this is a clean interface, what we would find is on that surface, it would move freely, or it'll slip on that surface. So the idea here is that there will be no or almost no resistance to moving. So in the case of a surfactant covered surface, this actually changes. So if we have some point here and we want to move it, what we would find is it has traction to the surface. So this is because if we want to move at that point, we would be compressing this monolayer of surfactants that's on the surface. And that would require force. And in fact, this compression, you can think of it like a spring. It will be an elastic force. So it'll increase more as you move the force that is there. So this traction is due to what's called Marangoni stress. And this particular effect is called Marangoni elasticity. And the idea here is that when we are moving this, we're moving on the surface, we are rearranging the concentration of surfactants on the surface changes locally, and that's unfavorable. So in turn, that concentration gradient results in a force that's pushing back because the molecules want to diffuse back towards the lower concentration. So generally, any type of effect or forces that arise from surfactant, or let's say not just surfactant, let's say surface tension gradients. So the other way to think about this is a surface tension gradient. When you have a higher concentration of surfactants, you'll have a high surface tension, so like a high sort of elastic force that's compressed there. And at the low concentration, you'll have a low surface tension, and you'll have a net force from the high surface tension to the low surface tension area. So the forces that arise from surface tension are called Marangoni forces. So there's a number of effects this causes, and this results in a lot of phenomena that are sometimes favorable and sometimes unfavorable. And we'll discuss that in a bit more detail. So your book, again, it does cover these in a very sporadic way over the course of many chapters. But we will be covering maybe the key points that are distributed through maybe chapters like 6, 17, 18 through 22. Okay.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
So just from like my experience, so something like soap, if you're washing your hands, like to me, it seems like when I wash my hands with soap, it kind of gets like less frictionless than if I'm just having my hands underwater.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So sometimes our experiences happen due to different reasons. So we actually talked about this one before in class. So the idea of your hands being slippery is actually because you form a surfactant monolayer or a charged monolayer on your surface. The surfactant molecules have charges, and you actually have a repulsive pressure between your hands, which causes this slippery sensation. It's because your hands actually can't, whatever your surfaces can't actually get as close together anymore. So that is one major mechanism of lubrication in general, avoiding on a molecular level things touching, that which reduces friction. So this is a different effect when we're talking about motion on a surface, on a liquid surface. Okay, but that is a good question. I'm glad you asked, because that can be confusing to think about. This is not an intuitive thing here at all, but it explains many things that we see all the time, and I'll explain that in a little bit. So we can, so again, just to make this totally clear, where are we time? Okay, 15 minutes, good. The presence of surfactants suppresses fluid motion parallel to the surface. So that's the key point. So it allows you to penetrate it more easily. For example, you can break the fluid surface more easily because of the lower surface tension, but you actually get, it's more difficult to shear the top surface. So we can think about this when we, in an example that you've probably all seen before. So one of these is a soap film. So if you take soapy water, you can dip it in a ring, or you can do other things, and you can get a film of soapy water that is in this little ring, right? This is the thing that you use when you're a child and you blow bubbles. Okay? So we can say, for the sake of simplicity, let the term gamma be the concentration of surfactants at the surface. So suppose you have a soap film and you pinch it. Right? You may have done this before. What you would find is, or looking at this at a molecular level, what you would see is when you pinch this soap film in the area that you're applying this force, you're creating more surface area or more surface, and you'll have a lower concentration of surfactants. And in turn, that will cause a higher surface tension, or let's call surface tension gamma. So fluid flows from low surface tension to high surface tension. So you'd have fluid flow in this direction, and you would, to resist that breaking. So that's why soap bubbles are stable, right? Hypothetically, we could create in some instant a film of water, right? And suppose like you completely undisturb it, there's no perturbations, like there's no vibrations or anything happening. We could sustain it, but in reality, there are small perturbations that would cause this fluid to destabilize and it would fall apart. In the case of soap films, this action of surfactants being able to, if there's ever a weak point, being able to come and fill that in with fluid gives it essentially a restorative quality that allows this to happen. So again, we see it every day, but we don't really think about it. And in some sense, it's counterintuitive because we know that surface tension decreases the strength of that fluid interface, right? So we can't explain the fact that we can make a soap film or a soap bubble by surface tension. So it has to do with this Marangoni force that causes fluid flow to happen. Okay, so again, this is again something you see every day, but at the same time maybe counterintuitive at the same time. Okay, so there's other things that we can talk about with regards to fluids. We mentioned this idea of there being this idea of no slip versus slip when we talk about fluids or bubbles. So we think about an air bubble rising in water. So from a theoretical perspective, what we would see is that air-water interface the boundary condition should be that it slips, right? Right, so it slips, meaning that there isn't friction there to this. So the idea here is if you have some air bubble, you would one way to draw this is that you can keep the reference point of the air bubble being stagnant and have water flow around it equivalently. So you can say due to buoyancy, you have these water streams that go around it from the standpoint of the bubble. At the surface, you should have slip, so you'll have fluid flow around it without friction. Inside of this, or what you would see at the surface is because of this sort of rotation, you'll have vortices that occur at the surface. So that would be a result, because once things flow to the bottom, they need to come back up, and that's what happens in theory if you're to solve this as a fluid mechanics problem, which you all can do, because you, at least almost all of you in this class, have taken fluid mechanics. So this is not that hard of a problem if you put this in spherical coordinates and identify your boundary conditions. You can get this flow field. So this is expected. And you can actually measure this. You can put like little tiny particles and you can see these little vortices happening if hypothetically. The issue is that people see is, while this is theoretically possible, this usually doesn't actually happen. It does happen if your system, your water, is incredibly clean. So if it is purified and the container it's in is purified, and you don't let it sit for very long and get contamination from the air and environment, this does happen. But for any practical application, it does not. So this theoretically happens. It can be confirmed to happen. If you were to try it yourself, it probably wouldn't happen because you need it to be rigorously clean. So in reality, what you would see is this tiny amount of contamination that's in this would move to the surface here and act as a surfactant. And then all of a sudden, you would say that that the bubble here would typically, or actually in most cases, rise as if it is a buoyant hard sphere. Meaning the no slip condition applies. Okay, so that is something that's interesting for people to study. People were dumbfounded by this for a long time because people understood the physics or the fundamentals here should work, but experimentally they're never able to get this to happen. This no slip condition would affect the velocity of the bubble, for example. So that's the simplest measure you can do is just measure how long it takes for an air bubble of a particular diameter to rise, and it did not match the theory. Likewise, people did not see these vortices on these bubbles, air bubbles. So, anyways, these are things that people have not figured out for practical reasons. This doesn't happen, but on a theoretical basis, it does. But it also comes into importance when we're affecting things as small amounts of contamination, for example, that we deal with in real life can cause things to happen that we don't expect. And that becomes important when we're designing systems as well. So this air bubble may not be something that you actually deal with in real life, but this type of effect is quite simple, and it does affect our everyday lives, especially when we're trying to design products that incorporate surfactants or depend on something being clean, for example. So, for example, again, we only have a few minutes. So one big example is the semiconductor industry, which is one of many people don't know is one of the biggest employers of chemical engineers. So if for people who work at a company like Intel or Advanced Micro Devices, Micron, Samsung, et cetera, that make computer chips, they work in a clean room, which is a room that filters all the air such that every meter cube, they have different classes, and usually they're in orders of magnitude. Class like 1, 10, et cetera, 100 refers to how many particles are in every square meter of volume. So anyways, this becomes a really important consideration for being able to do stuff. That small amount of contamination is very important in the semiconductor industry, especially considering that people are trying to make things, patterns and other devices that are in the tens or now getting to single nanometer length scales, reproduced billions of times within a square inch. Anyways, we'll probably talk more about that particular application later in the class, but it seems like we're probably towards the end, and we can end now. So everyone have a good day, and I'll see you on Monday.